Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sir Franz, and we're going to start our discussion of the endocrine system. So, the endocrine system is quite a complex system of control in the human body, but is also quite beautiful to learn. So, in general terms, as an introduction, kapag sinabi nating endocrine, ibig sabihin yan mayroong sets of tissues or cells na nagsesecrete ng hormone, and these hormones travel by way of the fluids of the body to exert effects elsewhere in the body, not in the same site where the hormone was secreted. Pag sinabi natin autocrine, no? A-U-T-O, autocrine, ibig sabihin nun, yung cell na nagsecrete ng hormone is the same cell upon which the hormone acts or the substance acts. So it's auto. The cell secretes, and it is also that same cell that responds to its own secretion. Pag sinabi nating paracrine, ibig sabihin ng term na para, P-A-R-A, katabi. So there is one cell that secretes, and the effects of the hormone or substance is exerted on the cells surrounding that cell. So right now I want you to differentiate autocrine, paracrine, and endocrine. So our topic right now is the endocrine system. And that means we will be dealing with hormones that exert action at the site distant from the source of the hormone. So the endocrine system, you can think of it as a master regulator. It is essential for all of the life-sustaining processes, metabolism, for growth and development, and for reproduction. The first thing that we should be able to differentiate would be the characteristics of the nervous and the endocrine systems. Etong dalawa are the two organ systems in the body that control the activity of the entire human body. Okay? So, para silang directors, no? This is where you should go. This is what you should do. Okay, this is how you should respond. So, silang dalawa yun. The nervous system and the endocrine system. So, let's differentiate the two. The endocrine system has a slower onset of response. What does that mean? If you receive a stimulus right now, the effect of the endocrine system in response to that stimulus, you may be able to see hours from now, to days, to weeks, to years from the onset of the stimulus. While the nervous system exerts a quick response. So the onset of action is rapid and it is faster. The endocrine system uses hormones, and these are substances that are secreted by cells and tissues, and they travel through the blood. Okay? And as the blood circulates throughout the body, then any cell or tissue in the body which expresses that receptor for the hormone will respond to the hormone. So, kailangan dadaan siya sa dugo. Yun yung principal definition ng isang hormone. While the nervous system utilizes neurotransmitters. And so, these will be interactions between two neurons across a synapse or a terminal neuron and a target organ. Okay? The endocrine system, kahit slow yung onset of response, however, the duration of the effect is longer. So that means that the effect of the endocrine system is durable. Okay. Next, the nervous system has a quick onset of activity or effect, but this also means that its duration of effects would be shorter, okay, generally shorter. The endocrine system, as you might have surmised, kasi gumagamit siya ng dugo, then the area of effect would be widespread. Anywhere that the hormone goes, if that organ or tissue of the body expresses the receptor, you will see an effect there. So it's you have the potential to exert effects in the entire body. While yung nervous system, the area of effect is focused. Kung saan lang yung distribution ng nerve or ng neuron, doon lang makikita ang effect. Okay? So, this slide is also quite nice because it tells you already what the organs or glands of the endocrine system are. So you have here the pineal gland, okay, is found in the brain. You have the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, and associated with the thyroid glands on its posterolateral aspect would be the parathyroid glands. You have here the thymus, which is a gland especially in neonates, yung mga kakapanganak pa lang, and fetuses. Okay? So in adult life, nawawala ito. The adrenal glands, it's called adrenal because it is on top of the kidney. And ito yung kidney, and ito yung adrenal gland. You have here the pancreas. So sa pancreas, you need to be aware that we are not dealing with the exocrine pancreas, which secretes digestive enzymes, but we are dealing with the endocrine pancreas, which secretes hormones that travel throughout the body. And you have the gonads, the ovary for females, and the testes for males. And here is a representative picture of the nervous system, kung nasaan yung distribution ng nerve fibers, and if that nerve is fired, doon mo lang makikita yung effect. So, what are hormones? Hormones are chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to direct activity of cells distant to the site of secretion. So, keywords dyan, chemical messenger, and it travels through the blood. Okay, so when we talk of hormones, we usually categorize the hormones into kung saan siya na-secrete, no? Is it a pancreatic hormone? Is it an adrenal hormone? So what organ secretes the hormone? So that's the first classification. Next, what is the function of that hormone? Is it a release inhibitor? Is it a release stimulator? What does that mean? Pag sinabi nating release inhibitor ang isang hormone, kapag na-secrete yung hormone na yun, it will prevent the release of other hormones. Pag sinabi nating release stimulator, pag na-secrete yung hormone na iyon, it will stimulate the release of another hormone. Or is it an end hormone? What does that mean? The hormone, end hormone, means kung siya ay na-secrete ng isang particular gland of the body, for example, the thyroid gland, it is the one that travels through the blood and exerts the effects on the peripheral tissues. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, siya mismo yung magpo-produce ng effect na hinahanap natin for that particular axis. Okay, so you have releasing and inhibiting hormones, and you have end hormones. So end hormones, example, thyroid hormone, insulin, glucagon, estrogen, cortisol. Um, Examples of releasing hormones would be ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which will then stimulate the adrenal glands to release cortisol. Okay? So yun yung pinagkaiba sa function niya. And lastly, we classify hormones based on the structure of the hormone. What is the chemistry of the hormone? So based on chemistry, we have two types of hormones. Peptide hormone, ibig sabihin, isa siyang protein. Okay? And as a protein, it is made up of amino acids. So examples of this would be insulin and glucagon. Ang andito sa picture, this is insulin. This is the chemical structure of insulin. And each circle with a three-letter abbreviation corresponds to a particular amino acid. Glycine, leucine, valine, glutamate, glutamine. So yan, pasunod-sunod yan. Ayan. So, ibig sabihin lang nito, yung buong hormone is made up of individual amino acids. It's a peptide hormone. So, the general properties of peptide hormones is they are water soluble. So, ibig sabihin nun, they will not be able to cross the cell membrane, and therefore, mag-i-interact sila with the target tissue or the peripheral cell on that peripheral cell's cell membrane. So, ibig sabihin, sa balot lang siya ng cell. Sa cell membrane, nakikita mo doon yung receptor. Magbabind ang peptide hormone sa receptor niya on the cell membrane, and that will be the start, no, of the transduction of the effects of that peptide hormone. The other type of hormone based on structure would be the steroidal hormones. That means yung structure ng hormone preserves the general steroidal structure, which is this one. This is your cyclopentano perhydrophenanthrene ring. Okay, so as a steroidal hormone, siya ay galing sa cholesterol, no? So cholesterol is the raw material which is then processed by the different steroidal hormone producing organs such as the gonads, the testes and the ovaries, the adrenal gland, no? Into the steroidal hormone such as estrogen and cortisol. So dahil itong steroidal hormone na ito ay lipid soluble, ibig sabihin yan, makakatagos siya sa cell membranes ng ating peripheral cells. So ano ibig sabihin nun? Ang steroidal hormone na ito magta-travel sa blood, and then tatagos siya sa cell membrane, papasok siya sa cytoplasm, papasok siya sa nucleus. Kasi those are lipid structures. So later on, we will talk about how these hormones exert their effect. So examples of this would be estrogen and cortisol. So the next question will be this one. What are the common mechanisms of hormone action? So I gave you an introduction into how this works. The first mechanism of hormone action will be signal transduction. So this is commonly seen in peptide hormone receptors found in the cell membrane, which utilize intracellular second messengers for signal amplification. So this sentence right here is quite difficult, and we can chop this into very important parts. So here is your cell membrane. Okay. And here is your peptide hormone receptor. The example here is insulin. Okay, so the first important aspect of this sentence is the peptide hormone receptor is found in the cell membrane. Ayan. So it will then create chemical reactions inside the target cell involving second messengers. So, pag sinabi nating second messenger, ibig sabihin nun, mayroong first messenger. And the first messenger will be the peptide hormone, insulin. The second messengers will be substances that will produce the ultimate effect of the first hormone, which is the first messenger, which is insulin. So pag sinabi nating second messenger, siya yung gagamitin ng receptor ng first messenger to produce the ultimate effects that are ascribed to that first messenger. So for example, we know that insulin causes a decrease in glucose. So that decrease in plasma glucose, which is outside the cell membrane, happens because glucose is able to enter the cell, okay, through glucose transporters. Yan. So, ulitin ko, bumababa yung glucose sa fluids ng katawan, sa plasma, dahil pumapasok siya sa cell. Okay, so glucose enters. Sabi natin, insulin causes a decrease in glucose kasi pumapasok yung glucose. So, paano ngayon napoproduce ng insulin, which is the first messenger, yung ultimate effect, which is yung pagbaba ng glucose sa plasma? It is through the use of intracellular sa loob ng cell, intracellular second messengers, which are these. So this is quite advanced and you can read about this. But what I want you to take away from this is that you have a first messenger and a second messenger. So yung second messenger will transduce the effect of the first messenger. So let's take the glucose influx into the cell as an example. So paano nga ba pumapasok yung glucose? Dahil tumataas yung levels or quantity of the glucose transporter present in the cell membrane. And tumataas yung quantity ng glucose transporters in the cell membrane because the glucose transporters which are found in the vesicle is phosphorylated by protein kinase B, PKB. So, yung PKB, protein kinase B, magdadagdag siya ng phosphate dito. And kapag phosphorylated na ito, gagalaw na siya at pupunta siya at mag-i-insert dito sa cell membrane. That's why you will eventually find lots of glucose transporters here. Dahil na-phosphorylate siya ng protein kinase B. Paano siya na-phosphorylate ng protein kinase B? Kasi tumaas yung levels ng inositol triphosphate, TIP3. So, tumaas yung levels ng inositol triphosphate dahil dinagdagan siya ng phosphate ng PI3 kinase na inactivate ng insulin receptor substrate proteins 1 to 4 na dumami dahil sila ay inactivate ng insulin receptor na naging active noong nagkaroon ng insulin secretion at nag-bind siya sa receptor niya. So, ito yung first messenger at lahat ng pathway na yun, lahat ng mga enzymes and chemicals na andito sa pathway na to would be your second messenger system. to produce the ultimate effect, which is the lowering of blood glucose. Okay? So another important aspect of this sentence is the phrase signal amplification. As you will observe, only in this picture, only one molecule of insulin binds to the receptor, but the receptor will activate lots of insulin receptor substrate. So, ibig sabihin, habang active at nakabind si insulin sa kanyang receptor, hindi lang nag-iisang IRS ang kanyang i-activate. At kung na-activate lang naman na yung IRS, insulin receptor substrate, hindi lang nag-iisang inositol triphosphate kinase yung kanyang i-activate. Marami. At kung merong na-activate na isa, PI3K, marami siyang ipoproduce na inositol triphosphate, hindi lang nag-iisa. At hindi lang din nag-iisa yung ma-activate ng inositol triphosphate na protein kinase B. So parami ng parami yung second messenger systems as you go down the line. So nagkakaroon ka ngayon ng signal amplification. And eventually that will lead to a magnanimous response, which is an increase in the insertion of glucose transporter 4 into the cell membrane. Kahit nag-iisa lang yung nag-stimulate na molecule. The next one would be gene regulation. So gene regulation is another common mechanism of hormone action. So the hormone receptor complexes are formed by lipid-soluble hormones. So sinabi ko kanina, based sa chemistry ng hormones, mayroon tayong peptide hormone which are water-soluble and steroidal hormones. And the exception to that is thyroid hormone, which is a peptide hormone but is lipid-soluble. So these lipid-soluble hormones will be able to pass through the cell membrane and enter the cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm, they can also pass through the nuclear envelope or nuclear membrane, which is also lipid. No? So makakatago siya doon, and it will be able to find its way in the cytoplasm and in the nucleoplasm. Okay? So ano mangyayari? These hormones, kasi nakapasok na sila sa loob, they will bind with their receptors and form complexes. So these complexes will then go into the nucleus, and in the nucleus of the cell, you will find the genes, no, that are the coding material to make proteins. Okay, so if they find a gene, these hormone receptor complexes will then facilitate the transcription and translation of that gene. So papabilisin niya ang paggawa ng protein na sinasabi ng gene na iyon. So kapag dumami na yung proteins from that gene, dadami ngayon yung effect ng protein na yon, which is either an enzyme or a structural protein. So let's recap the sentence. The hormone receptor complex is lipid-soluble. That's why it can cross the cell membrane and enter the cytoplasm or the nucleoplasm. And then it will bind to its receptor, which will form a complex. And then that complex will scan the entire genome, no? And then hahanapin niya yung gene na associated sa kanya. At pag nahanap niya na yung gene na yon, papadamihin niya ang protein na kinukode ng gene na iyon. Kapag dumami na yung protein, which is either an enzyme, bibilis yung pathway na kinakatalyze ng enzyme na iyon, leading to a change in cellular activity, or it can make a structural protein, which will change the structure of the cell or the tissue. So that's how your steroidal hormones and thyroid hormone will be able to produce its effect through gene regulation. So let's take a closer look at this example. This is a nice diagram to illustrate this paragraph. Okay, so you have T4 or thyroxine, which is a form of thyroid hormone that will be converted to triiodothyronine or T3, which is the active form. Tingnan nyo, this is the cell membrane. It is lipid soluble, so it can enter the cell membrane. Then, if this is your thyroid hormone, this is your thyroid hormone receptor. The thyroid hormone binds to its receptor, which will then form a complex. So, ito na yung complex. And this thyroid hormone receptor is in turn complex to another protein, which is your retinoid X receptor, which is a vitamin A receptor. So, sila, complex na sila in the first place. Pagdating ng thyroid hormone, ma-activate itong buong segment na ito ng complex. So, if this is your genome, that complex will scan the genome, and kapag nakita niya na yung response element, yung tawag natin, that's the segment of the genome that responds to the hormone. So this is your thyroid hormone response element. Pag nakita niya na yon, papabilisin niya ang transcription, forming mRNA, and then translation, kasi dumami yung levels ng mRNA, making proteins, which can either be enzymes or structural proteins. So what will be the effects? So thyroid hormone will increase the number of mitochondria in the cell. Therefore, your energy production ng cell tataas. It will increase the levels of the sodium-potassium pump, increase oxygen consumption, increase glucose absorption, increase the synthesis of glucose, increase the breakdown of glycogen to produce glucose, increase the breakdown of fat to yield energy, increase protein synthesis, and because all of these are active, it will increase the basal metabolic rate. So that's why your thyroid hormone is a metabolism regulator. Cardiovascular effects of thyroid hormone dahil din sa proteins na dahil na-activate yung gene, increase in cardiac output, increase in blood flow to the tissue, increase in heart rate, increase in the strength of contraction, and increase in respiration. Thyroid hormone is also important for the maturation of the brain and the spinal cord, for growth of the entire organism or human, and for all other systems. All cells need thyroid hormone. And lastly, we have the concept in endocrinology, or the study of the endocrine system. You will always find feedback mechanisms, no? So, ibig sabihin nun, palagi mong makikita yung feedback regulation in the endocrine system. So, pag sinabi nating feedback, yung effect ng hormone, okay, at saka yung level ng hormone will tell the system which created the hormone what to do. Okay, ulitin ko, feedback. So yung product will tell the manufacturer of the hormone how to go about with forming new hormone. So based on that, we have two types, positive feedback and negative feedback. When we say positive feedback, the end hormone further stimulates the hormone's production. So, ibig sabihin nun, pag na-encounter ng system na nag-produce ng hormone, yung hormone na pinroduce niya, at saka yung effects na pinroduce ng hormone, that will tell the system to make more hormone. So that will lead to an amplification of the synthesis and release of that hormone. An example of this will be in childbirth. So, lumalaki na yung fetus, okay, lumalaki na yung ulo ng bata. As the head of the baby pushes against the cervix, which is this one, the nerves in the cervix, yan, synapsing into the spinal cord going up to the brain of the mother, that will be perceived by the lower brain or the hypothalamus, and that will lead to the hypothalamus communicating to the pituitary gland to release more oxytocin. Okay, so that oxytocin, which is the hormone, goes into the blood, and this is carried in the bloodstream to the uterus. And the effect of oxytocin in the uterus, which is this entire thing here, would be to stimulate uterine contractions. So this will push the baby further downward. And as the baby is pushed further downward, its head will further contact the cervix, which will lead to the brain releasing more oxytocin, going into the blood, going back to the uterus, strengthening the contraction, pushing the head further. So this is your positive feedback loop. Okay. The second type of feedback would be negative feedback. So this is where the end hormone or its effects inhibit further hormone synthesis and release. So kanina, ginamit natin na example yung thyroid hormone. So here you will also find yung sinabi ko na classification ng hormones. So the hypothalamus, in response to decreased temperature, so lumalamig yung paligid, the hypothalamus will secrete thyrotropin-releasing hormone. So this is your hypothalamus. It will secrete TRH, which will go into the anterior pituitary gland. So this is your pituitary gland, yung parang betlog. The anterior pituitary gland, in response to the thyroid-releasing hormone, will release thyroid-stimulating hormone, which will go into the blood and contact the thyroid gland, which is found in the neck. Okay, so in response to TSH, the thyroid gland will then release thyroxine, which is your thyroid hormone. This thyroxine, once released by the thyroid gland, will tell the anterior pituitary gland and also the hypothalamus that the thyroid hormone has already been released. So, na-release na. No? So, sasabihan niya ngayon, yung gumagawa nung regulator ng thyroid hormone release na, tigil ka na muna kasi nag-release na ako ng thyroid hormone para hindi excessive yung ma-release na thyroid hormone. So, let us recap that, no? The hypothalamus released TRH. The pituitary gland, in response to TRH, releases TSH. And the thyroid gland, in response to TSH, releases T4 and T3. That T4 and T3 will tell the pituitary gland to stop releasing TSH, and it will also tell the hypothalamus to stop releasing TRH because the end hormones, T3 and T4, have already been released so that their concentrations in the blood are maintained in a narrow range, no? Para hindi excessive yung release ng thyroid hormone. So, here, the end hormone, which is T4, T3, inhibits further hormone synthesis and release. So, that's it. Let's just recap. So with that, let's just recap. We talked about the endocrine system and how it is different from autocrine and paracrine means of release. Endocrine system uses hormones then like that travel through the blood to exert effects distant to the site of secretion. Hormones are chemical messengers that again are released by tissues into the blood and circulate with the blood to exert effects throughout the body. And there are two types of hormones based on structure: peptide hormones, which are not lipid soluble and therefore have their receptors in the cell membrane, and lipid hormones, which are lipid soluble and will find or encounter their receptors inside the cell as they pass through the cell membrane. So, how do hormones work? Mechanism of effect. We have signal transduction, which utilizes second messengers, which have the property of signal amplification, and gene regulation, where the hormone will bind to its receptor and form a complex and go into the nucleus and find genes that are responsive to that hormone and increase the production of proteins coded by those genes. Those proteins will then tell the effect of that hormone. And lastly, we have regulation. We have two forms: positive regulation, which is quite rare in the human body, where the hormone um, that is released causes further release of itself or that same hormone. And negative regulation, which is more common in the human body, and that makes the levels of that hormone controlled at a narrow range by inhibiting further release of that hormone when that hormone has already been secreted. Okay, so with that, we end this lesson on introduction to the endocrine system.